Man, we've come so far, honestly. I remember that 2 years ago, before starting this crazy anime journey of mine, I would hear about all these overly obsessed anime fans, weeps, as I basically looked at them still back then with their toy collections and their body pillows, and I could never picture myself becoming one of them. And while I will say that I'm clearly not exactly on that level yet, I'm kind of getting there, man. You know, here I was practicing the cover of Steins on my guitar. I'm literally buying myself my own Oopa plushie, because that's just what Steins did. It just didn't allow me to let go of it by the time I did reach the end, and I realized I had to say goodbye to the characters and I was never going to get any more content in the universe. It's a testament to how well it pulls you in, how emotionally attached you find yourself getting to the characters. And by the way, for those of you that might be wondering about that guitar cover, I actually recorded the full thing, and I will be including it in one of my final reactions that is still going to be going up on my channel. I have, of course, been reacting to the entirety of both Steins the main show, as well as Steins Zero over on my channel, so go and check that out for sure. But man, I remember that when finishing Attack on Titan 2 years ago, which was the very first anime that I decided to check out, I kind of felt by the end of it that I had basically reached the peak already. You know, anime is never going to get better than this. I will never find myself being as much into a story as I was there, and in many ways that still might be the case. I think if we're talking simply about the complexity of the storytelling in a show like that, it's not like Steins really managed to get close, but the big mistake that I've always made when it comes to anime is I think treating it more as a genre rather than a medium, and that's the realization that's constantly hitting me, and somehow I still don't want to fully grasp it. But there are so many different types of anime that I wasn't even aware of before. You've got some that are focused on storytelling, you've got others that do a great job at character development, you've got entirely different subgenres like isekai that I'm finding out about now, which is this like reincarnation template, I guess, that several anime tend to follow. And that's where Steins really set itself apart for me, is it was, at the end of the day, the core of characters that you fall in love with, the lab members that you yourself start to feel, in a weird way, a part of. And Steins of course, started as a visual novel. That's what it is at its core. That's how it always began. And I myself have yet to check out those visual novels. I want to make that very clear. I've just been watching the anime versions up until now. I do plan to check them out eventually, but I found it kind of genius to learn about that fact, honestly, because I didn't do so until I was, I think, about halfway through the main show itself. And suddenly it all started to make sense to me why we were revisiting these similar locations every single time, like Okarin's room and the radio building, the place where Ferris works. It hit me that if this started as a visual novel, you're gonna be revisiting these same locations because, you know, it's kind of impossible for a visual novel game consisting of tens of, hours of content to constantly bring you to entirely new and different locations, right? It wasn't as much of an adventure, rather it was getting to spend time with your friends in all these similar locations constantly. And yeah, I found that fact alone already fantastic, and it's what made Steins immediately set itself apart from any of the animes that I myself had previously been checking out. But of course, you go through a whole process of discovering what Steins actually is about in the first place. You know, the first time that you're gonna hear Mayuri do a tu-tu-tu anytime that somebody comes in, you're like completely thrown off guard and you're like, what the hell just happened? When Okarin starts to make clear in the very first episode immediately that he has this 8th grader syndrome, but I myself had never heard about it in the first place. I didn't understand what he meant when he said El Psy Kongru, and when he talked about the organization that was after him. I thought, is this guy for real? It took me a little while for all those things to eventually settle it. Like, oh wait, this guy is kind of a little bit crazy. I mean, you know, he might be a wise fool, right? That would be probably the best way to put it. It just takes a while for all those things to settle in with you. What the hell is he talking about when he keeps bringing up the fact that Bruka is actually a guy? Okay. You know, Ferris and her video game references that she constantly you know, has these conversations about with Okarin, Mocha, who doesn't want to talk but constantly sends these text messages. All the characters have these particular traits that continue coming back, right? And it doesn't matter how many times that they get repeated, eventually you just fall in love with it and you don't want it to be any other way. The way that Mayuri, for example, calls herself Mayushi and she calls Okabe Okarin. I myself call him Okarin ever since I, you know, heard her do that. But it wasn't until later that the realization there too kicked in with me that like, oh, these aren't just funny nicknames that she calls them because she finds it cute or whatever. No, Mayushi is literally derived from Shina Mayuri. Okarin is derived from Okabe Rintaro. It all makes so much sense, and it's these little details that add so much character to this universe, charm to these characters in general, and it's really not hard to see why anyone would fall in love with these characters therefore too, just like I did. Now, when it comes to the original show, the one from 2011, Steins Gate, the way it's structured I find to be kind of genius, because I feel like it immediately pulled me in the first episode by introducing me to this huge mystery, right? And there's a bunch of questions that it basically throws at you, not expecting you to answer them whatsoever yet, but just to make you think about them in the back of your head, while the show basically then decides to delay answering most of that for a while still, to instead get you more familiar with the characters first for particular reasons that all make sense by the end of the story. But yeah, it's that first episode where you see Okarin going into the radio building, of course, and being confronted with a bunch of crazy stuff that is actually happening. First he finds the machine on the roof, which we later learn was of course the time machine. He has Makisa Kurisu pulling him out of the classroom, asking him about the warning that she received, which doesn't make any sense to us whatsoever, because not only are we introduced to Makisa Kurisu there for the first time, so is Okarin. He doesn't remember her, except from a magazine that he actually, you know, read about her in, I guess. He then accuses her of being part of the organization, which we ourselves don't even understand what organization he's talking about. And Okarin himself, for that matter, doesn't really know it, it seems, either. He hears screaming, right? Then finds Makisa Kurisu actually being stabbed. His reading Steiner goes off. It's all these events which, like I said, they pulled me in from the get-go. They made me fascinated by the mystery of it all, not realizing that it would in fact not necessarily be the main component of why I'd even get to love Steins Gate as much as I did. That's what later episodes started to really make clear to me, because Steins Gate then in the very first half of the show takes a lot of time getting you introduced not only to all the different lab members and their mannerisms, which I already touched upon just now, but it actually gives you a little bit of mixed feelings there too, because you don't know who necessarily to trust and whether to appreciate that group dynamic that's going on and all the happy moments that these characters do get to share with each other. You're dealing with an organization, of course, in CERN in the main show, and you have no idea whether any of them are actually part of it at that point. You've got a character like Suzaha who clearly knows a lot about the future but isn't letting up why she does so. She's accusing a character like Makisa Kurisu of being part of CERN and you don't know what to make of that. You've got even somebody as innocent as Mayuri, right? The moment where she like opens the microwave at some point while they're performing a certain experiment and she fucks it up for everybody else, I didn't know how to interpret that. I honestly didn't know whether I could trust her, which right now feels like a crazy thought that I had, because having finished both shows, Mayuri has literally come to be my favorite character in the universe, and I don't see her any other way than being this super endearing, helpful, friendly character, which is exactly why I like her so much. But back then, I was still questioning that. You know, it's already a roller coaster of conflicting emotions at that point, and it's why I love the first half honestly just as much as I do the second one. It's the second half that gets a little bit more credit, but I feel like the second half of Steins Gate couldn't nearly have been as good if it didn't do such a great job at setting up all these characters and the mystery around them in the first half in the first place, so that when everything does go wrong, and of course it's that episode 12 where Mocha comes in, reveals herself to be in service, let's say, of CERN, right? Kills Mayuri there, and the entire quest of Steins Gate basically becomes yeah, finding our way out of that alpha world line, I guess you could say, even if other challenges were still being presented afterwards when we did find a way to make our way out of there. It's from this moment out that Steins Gate consistently hits you with some of its most powerful moments, whether it is seeing all the ways in which Mayuri continues to die and Okarin starting to lose hope, literally, in finding a solution towards the problem that he faces. Whether it's finding out the identity of Suzuha, who turns out not only to be John Titor, but also to be Daru's daughter, of course, in the future. Or finding out the, the hidden identity of Mr. Brown. Rescuing, Marcus Sakurasu in the Beta world line by the end of the show. All of these moments would not have been made possible if it wasn't for the great setup that Steins Gate ultimately laid the foundation of in the first 12 episodes of the show. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about in that regard is the character development, and especially that pertains to Okarin, who we see go through quite a process over the course of the 24 episode run that Steins Gate has. You know, he starts off as this relatively distant person who doesn't quite believe in his own mind that he needs friends, right? And who sees himself as the cold, mad scientist who's just trying to destroy the world. And, I don't really know what he thinks, honestly. I think that's the conflicting thing about Okarin, right? Is that at the end of the day, he always had right intentions at heart. He just likes to tell himself that he doesn't. He kind of lies to himself and doesn't want to make him, feel like he has these emotions. But he comes to realize it, over the course of the show. And it's especially because he himself feels quite lonely. He goes through all these time travel experiments, gets to remember all the memories that he has, while all of his friends don't. He constantly has to catch them back up to speed with what is actually going on, what the goal he is that he's going after. He sees his best friend in Mayuri constantly die in front of him, and realizes that her next inevitable death is gonna be coming up imminently again. Every single time, it weighs on him a lot. And of course, by the end of it all, by the end of Steins Gate, we get, thankfully, that happy ending. We find the Steins Gate world line, but that doesn't mean that it didn't require a whole bunch of suffering in the meantime to actually get there, which is of course what Steins Gate 0 ends up focusing even more on. Now, that brings me actually to Steins Gate 0, and I'm gonna say something crazy about it. Like, people are not gonna understand why I could possibly say something like this, because from what I've been able to tell, it's definitely received a little less than the main show is, for pretty obvious reasons, I would say. But I myself might have actually ended up enjoying Steins Gate 0 even more than I did the main show, and it's for exactly all the reasons that so far I've been able to list to you all. Let's talk about character development, right? Steins Gate 0 did such a fantastic job from the get-go at thinking about the natural state of mind that most of these characters would have gone through. In particular, Okarin, for example, right? Coming off of episode 23B, the beta alternative episode that shows you an Okarin who actually did not succeed in his mission to rescue Marcus Sakurasu and ends up simply giving up because he doesn't want to go through the same process thousands of times, not being able to save the situation anyway. They thought about what his state of mind would have been like at that point, what it would take for him to actually be able to sort of move on from an event like that, how he would interact with all the characters around him. For example, we see that he goes to a psychiatrist, right? He doesn't actually want to revisit the lab. He gets these visions constantly of Marcus Sakurasu lying there in a pool of blood. Even with Ferris, right? The character who he always has these funny video game-like interactions with, he refers to it as the dark past. And it's just all these little ways in which the writers thought about, again, how Okarin would have dealt with this situation, how he would have interacted with other characters, that to me came as a huge surprise. Now, simultaneously, what I think is one of the biggest strengths, therefore, of Steins Gate 0 is how it actually gets to focus a little bit more on the other characters around Okarin now too, not only giving them more actual development, because they never got to have it in the main show. Somebody like Mayuri is basically just a victim there, somebody that the show wants you to really like and stuff, so that you'll feel super fucked up when you see her die 1,000 times in front of you in the same way that Okarin does. But she never really gets to learn about the situation, she never gets to be made aware of it, because she wasn't part of that mission and trying to fix it. In Steins Gate Zero, she finally is. In fact, by episode 16, I think it is, she starts to regret the decision that she herself made, not pushing Okarin to give it another shot when trying to save Makise Kurisu. And we get this beautiful scene playing out where she's literally, you know, crying there on the bench, telling Okarin that she regrets it and wanting to be of substance in that quest for a change as well, wanting to actually do something about it and go back along with Suzuha, who is another character who gets real development in Steins Gate Zero and isn't willing to give up on that mission in the same way that Okarin actually did. She still, you know, wants to go along with it. It's the whole reason why she came from the future to this timeline in the first place. And while everybody is out there having fun nonetheless, right? While there's the party going on and stuff, she herself continues to be focused on her mission, and it's the entire reason why she's there in the first place. These characters, they get to have their own development process this time around, and I am able to fully appreciate it this time, because last time around I wasn't even sure whether I could trust them in the first place. Now I realize that like these were all on my side. I knew them better than ever, and I was really able therefore to love even the smaller moments that much more, right? The scene where they go to clean the apartment along with Sergeant Ney being there. Even the song that Mayuri sings for Kagari, a character that I know not too many people were happy with, didn't really see the point of her existence, and I kind of understand that. She wasn't necessarily the most important introduction to the show, but I feel like she added a new element to Mayuri herself there, you know, like Mayuri is actually thrown completely off guard when she finds out that there's this character who loves her so dearly because she was raised literally as her daughter in the future. Mayuri, however, doesn't know Kagari at this point yet and now has to act literally like a mother there and takes on that particular role. It's so great. I love all the arcs that they came up with for the characters, even though admittedly there is a large chunk, especially in the middle portion of the show, that isn't the most eventful or doesn't add too much necessarily to the universe as a whole. That being said, Steins Gate Zero also had a bunch of highlights. I mean, there's the episode where we go back to the Alpha timeline and we see what would have happened if Okarin did decide to give up on his quest to save Mayuri this time around. And we see how she's being remembered by everybody around her. There is, of course, the episode where Okarin finally becomes Hoenn Kyuma again. And with his evil laughter announces his reinvigorated presence, I guess you could say. Or there's the scene where we say goodbye to Amadeus with the fantastic music that's playing in the background. And of course, I don't even need to talk about the ending of Steins Gate Zero, the final scene where Okarin comes into the past 18,000 BC and presumably saves Mayuri and Suzuha, even if there's a lot of discussion still about what exactly played out in that particular moment. The way it was done, the music that is so fantastic in Steins Gate Zero, and the thought of it alone that he comes to rescue them there in a moment where they themselves had basically given up and realized that there was no escaping this tragic fate. Man, was it a fantastic ride once again, and was I happy with what Steins Gate Zero ultimately added to the Steins Gate storyline as a whole. I think that basically sums it all up. I've done a lot of talking, I know, but with a show like this, you want to make sure to touch on all the important details, because what an absolutely phenomenal ride Steins Gate was. It really managed to capture a part of my heart, I would literally say. And I think what ultimately is the most fantastic thing about this story that I've come to realize about it is that with most of the shows and most of the anime that I watch, it's a one-time experience. It's the kind of story that you get to experience with so many different plot twists, right? That you'll never you know, you'll never be able to go back to it and relive it in the same way that you did originally. And Steins Gate, of course, has some of that. There are plenty of surprises that on a rewatch you'll be aware of and therefore won't have the same impact. But at the end of the day, Steins Gate is also this kind of comfort food. It's the type of show where you like spending time with its characters. You like being a part of the lab member group, and anytime you go back to watch episodes, which I've already done several times by now, it just gives you the same feeling that it initially already did. If anything, for the main show, I am able to even appreciate some of its early moments that much more because I know where the allegiances of these characters lie now and that I don't have to question them anymore moving forward. It's been an absolutely fantastic run. I really hope you all enjoyed my thoughts about Steins Gate. In this video. Of course, you can still go and check out all my reactions to both Steins Gate and Steins Gate Zero over on my channel. Don't forget, of course, therefore also to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. If you want to support me even more, you can of course go and check out my Patreon page, which will be linked on top of the description. Over there on the lowest tier, you can support me and actually get early access to videos like this, in-depth analysis videos that I do for all the shows that I watch or that I'm looking forward to. Next time I'm going to be talking about the Attack on Titan finale, which will be a very exciting video to make, no doubt. That video is already going to be up over on my Patreon on the lowest tier, like I said, so you can support me there and check it out straight away. And with that being said, I want to thank you all a lot for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you back in a next video.